The sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of red and gold as it dipped behind the jagged peaks of Hollow Ridge. For centuries, the townspeople whispered about the ridge, claiming it was cursed. They spoke of strange disappearances, ghostly figures wandering the woods at night, and unsettling sounds echoing from its caves. Most considered it folklore, a way to explain the mysteries of the mountain. Sara had heard the stories all her life. She used to laugh them off, believing them to be nothing more than a collection of myths meant to scare children. But when her brother, Ethan, disappeared after hiking near the ridge, the legends began to feel far more real. He had shrugged off warnings about the ridge, convinced it was just another hike. But when he didn't return, a cold dread had settled over Sara. Something was wrong, something beyond the reach of any search party or explanation. The authorities had combed through the forest, questioned locals, and even sent up a rescue helicopter, but it was as if Ethan had vanished into thin air. There were no traces of him, no footprints, no belongings. Sara knew she couldn't wait any longer. If Ethan was still alive, she had to find him. As dusk fell, Sara packed her bag with essentials, a flashlight, rope, some water, and set off alone, following the narrow trail her brother had taken. The woods around Hollow Ridge were unnervingly quiet, even in daylight. Now, as night began to creep in, a heavy silence blanketed the forest, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. She felt like the trees were watching her, their twisted branches like skeletal arms reaching out. The deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the air became, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Then, in the distance, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. Ethan's red backpack, hanging from a low branch. It was torn, as if by some wild animal, but there was no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just emptiness. Her heart raced as she examined the area around the bag, hoping for any clue that could lead her to Ethan. And then she saw it. The faint outline of footprints leading toward the mountain. But they weren't Ethan's. They were larger, deeper, as though something far heavier had been dragging its feet. She followed the trail, feeling the weight of the ridge looming ahead. The closer she got, the more the air changed. It grew colder, despite the summer evening, and a faint humming sound seemed to come from the mountain itself. Finally, she arrived at the mouth of a cave, its entrance like the gaping maw of some forgotten beast. This was where the footprints led, and though every instinct screamed at her to turn back, she knew she couldn't leave without knowing the truth. Sara took a deep breath and stepped inside. The cave walls were slick with moisture, and strange symbols covered them, markings she had never seen before. They seemed to pulse faintly, like they were alive, reacting to her presence. As her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, it caught glimpses of something moving, shadows shifting just out of sight. She could hear whispers now, soft and distant, like 1,000 voices speaking at once but just beyond comprehension. Her breath quickened. The deeper she ventured, the more disoriented she felt. It was as though the cave itself was twisting, stretching into a labyrinth of tunnels and passageways. The walls seemed to close in, and every step echoed unnaturally, as if there were others walking beside her. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl, vibrating through the rock. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of breathing, slow, heavy, deliberate. Sara's heart pounded as she pointed her flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, a voice pierced the stillness. Sara. It was faint, distorted, but it was unmistakably Ethan's voice. She froze, her heart leaping with hope and terror. "Ethan," she called out, her voice trembling. "Where are you?" No response. She moved faster, her footsteps quickening. The walls around her felt like they were closing in, but she pressed on, following the echo of her brother's voice. As she rounded a bend in the cave, her flashlight caught a figure in the distance, standing deathly still. "Ethan!" she cried, rushing toward him. But as she drew closer, the figure came into focus, and it wasn't her brother. It was a man, frozen in place, his face contorted in terror. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide open, unblinking. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, as though he had been caught mid-shout and paralyzed in place. But he was breathing, shallow and uneven. Sara stepped back in horror. What happened to you?" The man didn't respond. He couldn't. It was as if he was trapped inside his own body, locked in a prison of flesh and bone. She stumbled backward, her hands shaking. The whispers around her grew louder now, more urgent, filling the cave. They weren't coming from any single direction. They were everywhere, surrounding her, pressing in on her mind. "Help me!" Ethan's voice echoed once more, distant but growing nearer. She spun around, and there he was. At first glance, it was Ethan, standing at the end of the tunnel, his body lit by the faint, eerie glow of the symbols on the walls. His face was pale, and his eyes were glassy and focused. "Ethan," Sara whispered, her voice cracking. She took a cautious step forward, but something in her gut twisted. Ethan didn't move. "Sara, run," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. A cold dread seeped into her bones. This wasn't her brother. It was something else, something wearing his face. Behind her, the ground trembled, and the shadows began to shift, coming to life. Eyes, dozens of them, glimmered in the darkness, watching her. The growling sound returned, louder now, and with it, the unmistakable sensation of something massive moving closer. Sara's heart hammered in her chest as the weight of the cave seemed to press down on her. The thing that looked like Ethan took a step forward, its head tilting unnaturally to the side. "Run," it whispered again. This time, Sara didn't hesitate. She turned and sprinted toward the cave's entrance, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers became a deafening roar behind her, and the ground seemed to shift under her feet, trying to pull her back. With a scream caught in her throat, Sara realized she was no longer the hunter. She was the hunted. Whatever had taken Ethan, whatever had turned that man into a living statue, was coming for her next. She ran, her lungs burning as the whispers grew into a deafening roar. She could feel the presence closing in, a cold breath on the back of her neck. She sprinted for the exit, the faint glow of the cave entrance barely visible in the distance. But as she reached the mouth of the cave, a hand, cold and lifeless, gripped her wrist. It was Ethan, his eyes, vacant and glassy, locked onto hers as he whispered one final word. "Run." But Sara knew it was too late.